We just sang My Living Hope, which is the title of this sermon series I've been preaching the last 5 weeks. This is the fifth and last lesson in the series. I'm calling it the power of hope. You know, Paul wrote to the church of Corinth at the end of chapter 13, and now remain these three: faith, hope, and love. Of all the things that will ever last through this world, there are three things that we'll take to heaven with us. That's what he's saying. Faith, which will turn to sight. Hope, and love. That's how important hope is. And then we read in Hebrews chapter 6, because God wanted to make the unchanging nature of his purpose very clear to the heirs of what was promised, he confirmed it with an oath, and God did this so that by two unchangeable things in which it is impossible for God to lie, we who have fled to take hold of the hope set before us may be greatly encouraged. We who have fled to take hold of the hope. That's what we've been talking about these weeks, is taking hold of hope. A living hope, like we just sang. But it gets better. We have this hope as an anchor for the soul, firm and secure. You know what an anchor is, don't you? An anchor is something that goes down deep and sticks. It's unmovable. Jesus is our anchor for the soul that is unmovable. And that's why hope is so important. Napoleon said, a leader is a dealer in hope. As a leader in our church, I want to be a person that you can look to for hope. There is enough discouragement out in the world. We need some encouraging people. There are enough disheartening things out in the world. We need some heartening people. There is enough hopelessness out in the world. We need to be a people with an anchor of hope driving us. When that happens, regardless of what temporary losses or difficulties you face, you can keep your head up. Losses in life are never fun, but there's one loss nobody can ever afford to experience, and that is a loss of hope. A loss of hope. That'll do you in. Because if you lose hope, that might be your last loss. Because when hope is gone, so is motivation and the ability to endure. Hope gives. It gives to us even when we have little or nothing left. It's one of the most precious things we have in life. Now remain these three: faith, hope, and love. And so one of the things hope does for us is it helps us say, I can, instead of I can't, to life. And we really need that. You know, first we all know is Philippians 4:13, I can do everything through him who gives me strength. Can you imagine the difference in that verse if it said, I can't do anything through him who gives me strength? Can you imagine the difference? Sure. I can do all this through him who gives me strength. One of the great theologians of the 20th century was Paul Tillich. And just before he died, in the months before he died, he wrote maybe his best book, The Courage to Be. And Tillich said the book was about real courage, saying yes to life in spite of all the hardship and pain which are a part of everybody's human experience. He said it takes courage to find something positive and meaningful about ourselves and our life every single day. And then one of his quotes in the book was, loving life is perhaps the highest form of the courage to be. Where does the courage to be, to love life, come from? It comes from hope. It comes from keeping your hope alive. It comes from being able to say, I can do everything through him who gives me strength, rather than letting Satan say to you in your mind, no, you can't. No, you can't. Hope is what allows you to say, I can. Over and over again, the people of this great land of ours have been told, you can't do that. And then they kept hope alive, and they did it anyway. Nearly 200 years ago, our nation nearly split from people saying you can't abolish slavery. But we did. There were people who said you can't possibly build a railroad from the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific. But we did. There were people who said you can't give women the right to vote. But we did. There were people who said there's no way you're going to be able to go across the oceans and fight the war and defeat Nazi Germany and their ally Japan. But we did. There were people that said there's no way you can allow black children and white children to go to school together. But we did. There were people who said there's no way you'll ever be able to pass a Civil Rights Act, but we did. There were people who say there's no way, when President Kennedy said in 1962, we're going to put a man on the moon. There were people who said there's no way you're going to put a man on the moon. That's the silliest thing I ever heard of, and some of you still think we didn't. But we did. There were people who said there's no way you'll ever tear down the Berlin Wall, but we did. There were people who said you cannot possibly map the human genome, but we did. There were people who said there's no way you could ever elect a black man president of the United States, but we did. There are people in Jesus' time, the Romans, the Jews, inspired by Satan, who told Jesus he was finished, crucified him, buried him in a sealed tomb, but as we sang a few minutes ago, up from the grave he arose. With a mighty shout he arose. He did. That's hope. That's hope. It can only happen through hope. I can, and its attitude only happens through hope. What else does hope do for us? Why is it so important? Well, it gives us enthusiasm and energy. It's been said that a person can live 40 days without food and 4 days without water and 4 minutes without air, but only 4 seconds without hope. Why? Because hope provides the power that energizes us with life. It is a powerful thing. It keeps us going when the times are tough. It creates excitement for us in the future. It gives us strength and courage. You know, it is no coincidence that people who suffer with depression, particularly depression, but any emotional illness or chemical imbalance in the brain, whether it be depression or anxiety or whatever, it's no surprise that the first symptom they usually see is a lack of energy. A lack of energy. Because lack of hope and lack of energy usually go hand in hand. Lethargy and hopelessness usually go hand in hand. People who have a hard time believing in themselves have a difficult time finding the energy to cope with life and its challenges. Why is hope so important? Because as we've sung this morning in almost every one of the songs that we sang, hope looks forward to the future. The Apostle Paul wrote, "For the grace of God has appeared, that offers salvation to all people, and it teaches us to say no to ungodliness and worldly passions and to live self-controlled, upright, and godly lives in this present age. Would you read this next screen aloud with me, please? While we wait for the blessed hope, the appearing of the glory of our great God and Savior Jesus Christ. Notice that again in its context. Salvation has come to us, teaching us to say no to sin, live self-controlled lives in this present age while we are waiting for that blessed living hope, which then turns into sight when we see the great Savior appear. Hope looks forward to the future like nothing else does. A man named Joe asked his friend Bill, "You look downhearted, man. What are you worried about?" And Bill said, "My future. I'm worried about my future." And Joe said, "What looks so hopeless about your future?" And Bill said, "My past." Isn't that the truth? I can certainly identify with Bill. Maybe you can too. Our yesterdays have a tendency to invade our todays with negativism, stealing our joy and our hope. Nothing will steal your hope faster than yesterday and the past. And Satan loves to keep you trapped in yesterday and in your past. I love Ralph Waldo Emerson's quote, "Finish each day and be done with it. You have done what you could. Some blunders and absurdities no doubt crept in. Forget them as soon as you can. Tomorrow is a new day. Begin it well and serenely and with too high a spirit to be encumbered with your old nonsense." You know what too high a spirit is? That's a synonym for hope. You have to have hope to face the future with promise. Hope leans forward with expectation. It desires to plan for tomorrow and have faith about its future. That's why hope is so important to us. There's a story about a salesman from the Old West, and as the salesman was talking with the owner of the general store, a rancher came in. And the owner excused himself. "Jack, take care. You've been on this scene a few times." And so the rancher asked for a few things, a list that he needed, but he wanted credit. He wanted all credit. He didn't want to pay anything. He wanted all credit. And so before agreeing to the credit, the store owner said, "Well, are you doing any fencing this spring?" And the rancher said, "Sure am, Will." And he said, "Well, are you fencing in or are you fencing out?" He said, "I'm fencing in. I'm taking in another 360 acres next week." And he said, "That's good to hear, Josh. You got the credit. Just go out back and tell Harry what you need." And the salesman who was standing there was confused. He said, "I have seen every kind of credit system in the world, but I've never seen one like that. How does that work?" And the storekeeper said, "Well, if a man is fencing out, that means he's on the defensive. He's just trying to keep what he's got. But if he's fencing in, he's growing and getting bigger. And I always give credit to a man who is fencing in because that means he's got hope." You fencing in? You fencing in? Do you have hope for the future? Do you have high expectations for tomorrow? The way you get there is through hope. A lack of hope creates indifference about the future. And that, my friends, is an absolute killer. Nobody can live that way very long. Why do you need hope? Because hope changes things. It changes things. It really does. Have you ever been down and then something happened just to get you up? Somebody said a word of encouragement or you got some good news or what, and then all of a sudden, You got up. Do you know what got you up? Hope. Hope. It changes things in our lives. One of the best biographies you'll ever read is No Ordinary Times by the peerless Doris Kearns Goodwin. Many pages of the book were dedicated to England and Prime Minister Winston Churchill's leadership during the dark days of conflict with the Nazis. I've said many times I believe Winston Churchill was the single greatest person of the entire 20th century. He just stood alone, facing down what up until that time seemed to be the biggest, strongest, meanest army in history, the Nazi onslaught. And when Churchill was asked what was England's greatest weapon versus the Nazis, he said over and over again, where there is heroism, there will always be hope. Over and over again, he talked about the people must have hope. We look outnumbered, things look bad, but the people must have hope. How was one relatively small nation standing alone for quite a long time, begging for our help to enter the war while we waited and waited and waited to see what was happening? How were they able to do it? One man stood there for months while the Nazis were advancing and said, we will never, ever, ever give up. And we will have hope. Hope sustains you, changes you. It's our greatest asset and our greatest weapon that we can possibly use to battle our losses when they seem to be mounting. That's why hope is one of the three things that remains, and now remain these three: faith, hope, and love, because hope discovers what can be done instead of what can't be done. We often all know what can't be done, or at least we're told what can't be done. Hope looks at what can be done. But here's the most important thing I want you to leave with this morning. In fact, this is the most important thing I want you to leave with this entire series. And that is, hope is a choice. It is a choice. You choose to have it or choose not to. You can choose either way. Oh, it's a phenomenal story about a man whose shop had burned down in the biggest fire in the history of our nation, the Great Chicago Fire of 1871. And the man arrived at the ruins the next morning carrying a table, and he sat a table down in the midst of the charred ruins, and he had a handwritten sign that he put out in front of it that said, "Everything lost except wife, children, and hope. Business will resume as usual tomorrow." That man's response is one I truly admire after such a heavy loss. Where did he get his hope? From his circumstances? Certainly not. From his good timing? Absolutely not. From other victims of the fire? Nope. How many others faced the future with such positive determination? If he made this kind of a commitment to hope, why can't we? He made that commitment because it's a choice. It is a choice we all have. Some people say that choosing hope is a pie in the sky, by and by approach to life, that it's unrealistic. The Bible disagrees. The Bible says in Hebrews chapter 10, let us hold unswervingly to the hope we've professed. For he who promised is faithful. Everybody's capable of choosing hope. There's not a person in this room that's not capable of it. Does it take courage? Yes. Does it take faith? Yes. But everybody is capable of making a choice to live with hope. It first of all affects your attitudes. In the great Carmen Christi hymn, in my favorite chapter in the New Testament, in Philippians chapter 2, and my favorite passage is Philippians 2, 5 through 11. It was called the Carmen Christi hymn in the church. They actually sang it as a hymn. And it begins with, in your relationships with one another, have the same mindset as Christ Jesus. And that is a mindset, what? Of hope. Of hope. It affects your attitudes and your thoughts and your choices. Paul wrote to the church at Rome, love must be sincere, hate what is evil, cling to what is good, be devoted to one another in love, honor one another above yourselves, never be lacking in zeal, but keep your spiritual fervor serving the Lord. And I'm going to stop right there. Because I want you all to read aloud with me verse 12 with a particular focus on the fourth word. Read with me, please. Be joyful in hope, patient in affliction, faithful in prayer. You can do it. It is a choice. If it weren't, he wouldn't tell us to. Last week I mentioned a couple of people who had great hope, and they used humor to work their way out of it. I mentioned Patch Adams, the movie, and the person, and then I mentioned Norman Cousins, the editor of the Saturday Evening Times, and that Cousins had ankylosing spondylitis, which is a terrible disease. He checked himself into a hotel room and just played loops of comedy videos all the time, and he thought humor helped to heal him. And in his book of the same title, Anatomy of an Illness, he said, the main trouble with despair is that it is self-fulfilling. I want you to let that sink into your brain. It is. You keep thinking despairing thoughts and it will become self-fulfilling. People who fear the worst tend to invite it. Heads that are down can't scan the horizon for new openings. Bursts of energy do not spring from a spirit of defeat. Ultimately, helplessness leads to hopelessness. It does. That's why we have to choose one of the top three, my friends. We have to choose hope in our lives. Bob Wozniak had a book out a few years ago called Who Says the Fat Lady Has to Sing? And it's a reference to a fat lady comes from the opera because the finale of an opera is traditionally sung by the soprano, who was often, how shall we say this, heavyset. And when she sings her incredible final solo, you know the opera's finished. Then it's time to go home. Nowadays, that phrase is used to refer pretty well to just about anything. People say it's not over till the fat lady sings. That means there's time for the outcome to change. There's a good chance that sometime in the middle of the fourth quarter tonight, you'll hear one of the announcers say that. It's such a cliche now. It's not over until the fat lady sings. But in the book, he takes exception to that idea that we ever give up, especially on our dreams. And he said, we have all heard the expression, it's not over until the fat lady sings. The implication here is that when the fat lady sings, the game is over and the will to continue fighting is lost. We choose to stay down on the canvas of life, afraid to get up and go another round because we are too beaten down to absorb any more punishment. We would rather quit on our dreams than continue to fight in pain, never knowing what could have been. The question I pose in this book is this: why does it ever have to be over? When did it become okay to give up, lay down, roll over, and attempt to sleep away our problems, losing our energy and enthusiasm for life? Who made quitting an option? Who says the fat lady has to sing? Never in the history of our country has that been a more apropos essay. We're hearing right now constantly this phrase, quiet quitting. Some people think it grew out of the COVID shutdowns, but where a lot of people have just decided, I'm gonna do just what I have to do to get by. I'm not gonna do any more. I just don't care anymore. Listen, that will kill anything. That'll kill a family. That'll kill a church. That'll kill a nation. And it's something that has to be addressed. And the antidote to quiet quitting is hope. Because hope energizes and charges and leans forward to the future. Why do people give up? Because they haven't done what these scriptures say. That's simple enough. One last thing and I'll close. One of the most hopeful times in anybody's life is when they are expecting a child, looking forward to the birth of a child. The world of possibilities for that child seems limitless, especially for a child born in a free country like the United States of America. And people just think so many big positive things about that child. They do. And Jim's parents were just like all the rest of us. They were hopeful. Even though they were little more than kids themselves, they were both teenagers when they discovered they were going to have a child. But their optimism for Jim was also shaken when they discovered at birth that the new little boy was born without a right hand. And so they sought answers from everywhere for the birth defect. They never found a specific reason for it. It was, the doctors all said, just something that merely happened. And the teenage parents had to find a way to deal with it. And during the drive home, Mike, the father, told Kathy, the mother, we don't have a problem. We've got a blip on the screen. We can handle this. Now, we can make it a problem if we want it to be a problem. But I suggest that we right now say it's not a problem anymore. Little Jim was listening in the back seat. He said on that 2-hour trip coming back from Flint, Michigan in the Children's Hospital, we got our strength back. Mom and Dad felt hope, even optimism for the first time, beginning to focus not on what I lacked, but on what I had, which is the key to life. Well, what did Jim have? Well, little Jim had a love for sports, and it turns out he wound up having really good athletic ability. When he was 6 years old, his dad bought him a baseball glove, and he loved it. And he spent hours throwing a rubber baseball at a brick wall, bettering his aim and arm strength, figuring out how to get his glove from his right hand onto his left hand, so after he threw the ball with his left hand, he could also field it and then throw it back. If you've never seen him do it, you should Google it. And Google it in regular motion, then Google it in slow motion, and you'll be amazed by what it looks like. And once he came up with a system, he kept improving his speed and fluidity. And as he got better, he stood closer to the wall, so he had to make the transition more quickly to catch the ball. By the time he got to high school, he was a quarterback on the football team with one arm. Or one hand, I should say. He was the best pitcher on his baseball team in high school with one hand. The Toronto Blue Jays drafted him, but he had his heart set on playing for the University of Michigan because he was, and his family were big Michigan Wolverine fans, and he did for 3 years, and he was an All-American with one hand. And he won 2 Big Ten championships with one hand. And he played on the Olympic baseball team, and he was the MVP on the Olympic baseball team with one hand. And he pitched in the gold medal game in the 1988 Summer Olympics in Seoul, South Korea, with one hand. He was drafted a second time by the California Angels. He played Major League Baseball for 10 years. He was pretty good at the height of his career. In 1993, pitched a no-hitter at Yankee Stadium with one hand. You see, there were a lot of things about playing Major League Baseball that he misjudged or didn't expect. But the thing that surprised him the most, he said in his autobiography, was the attention he got from children with disabilities similar to his. And so, here's what he said, and I quote, "These children were shy and beautiful, and they were loud and funny, and they were, like me, somehow imperfectly built." That's where the title came from. They were, like me, somehow imperfectly built. And like me, they had parents nearby, parents who willed themselves to believe that this accident of circumstances or nature was not a life sentence, and that the spirits inside these tiny bodies were greater than the sums of their hands and feet. And he said he never turned down a single child, even when he was exhausted or discouraged or busy. Why? Because he wanted to give them hope, like his parents had given him in the back seat of that car coming back from the doctor. How was Jim Abbott able to learn from his losses? Because he had hope. And because he had hope, he could have energy to deal with his problem. And because he had hope, he could trust the future and believe in the future. And because he had hope, he had the energy to keep trying. Hope provided the motivation for learning, and he used that motivation to go further than anybody else ever believed was possible. That, my friends, is the power of hope. It is the power of hope. And now remain these three: faith, hope, and love. And the greatest of these is love. And that hope is an anchor for your soul, Hebrews says. I want you to learn in these weeks that we've studied this together, more than anything else, that hope is a choice. Hopelessness is also a choice. I've had a lot of setbacks in my life too. Like many of you, I've had 7 surgeries. I've had some things go wrong. I've had lots of things go wrong in my life. So I've had some setbacks too. But I can tell you one thing: I had never had nothing like Jim Abbott had, and like he had to deal with. Never have. Hope brought him through. Hope will bring you through. Hope brings me through, because it's one of the things that lasts and remains for everybody: faith, hope, and love. And you can choose it.